The knock came just before sunset, the kind of hour when the light turns copper and every shadow feels longer than it should. The widowed cowboy was standing at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled, flour dusting his dark shirt like snow. He had been trying, again, to make biscuits from a recipe his wife once knew by heart. The first batch had burned, the second had gone flat, and the third sat heavy in his stomach like a reminder that some things didn't come back, no matter how hard you wanted them to. When the knock sounded, sharp and unexpected, he froze, certain for a foolish second that grief itself had learned how to knock. He wiped his hands on a towel and opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, framed by the dying light. She was not young, not old, just worn in the way people got when life kept asking and never waited for the answer. Her brown hair was pinned back neatly, though loose strands escaped around her face. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, and her boots looked as though they had known too many roads. Still, she held herself straight, chin lifted, eyes calm. "I was told you need a cook," she said, voice gentle but firm, as if she had practiced courage all day and would not waste it now. He was about to say there must be some mistake, he hadn't posted anything, hadn't asked anyone, when he noticed movement behind her. A small shape shifted, then stilled. A little girl peeked out from behind the woman's coat, fingers curled tight into the fabric. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her dress was clean but patched, her shoes scuffed thin. She held a rag doll with one ear missing, its stitched smile faded from years of comfort. The child's eyes were wide and curious, not afraid, just watchful. She studied the cowboy as if he were another road she might have to walk. The woman followed his gaze and rested a hand on the child's shoulder. "This is my daughter," she said quietly, as though apologizing for her presence. The girl leaned out just a little more, enough for the porch light to catch her face. She smiled, small, shy, but sincere, and whispered, "Mama makes the best bread." The words were barely louder than the evening breeze, yet they struck him harder than any shout could have. For a moment, no one spoke. The house behind him felt suddenly too quiet, its walls listening. He thought of the last time bread had cooled on his counter, steam curling into the air while his wife laughed at his impatience. He remembered small hands reaching up for a piece torn too soon. The memory tightened his chest, but it didn't break him. Instead, it left a hollow ache that felt ready to be filled with something living. He started, then stopped. He hadn't heard a child's voice in this house since the funeral, since neighbors brought casseroles and spoke in whispers, since silence moved in and never left. He stepped aside without fully deciding to. "It's getting cold," he said gruffly. "You'd better come in." The woman hesitated, just a breath, just enough to show she had learned not to trust open doors, but she nodded and guided her daughter inside. The girl's eyes widened as she crossed the threshold, taking in the worn furniture, the old photographs on the wall, the kitchen that smelled faintly of burned biscuits and loneliness. Her gaze landed on the table dusted with flour, and her face brightened like she had found something familiar in a strange place. The cowboy closed the door, the sound solid and final behind them. He felt it then, the shift. Not hope exactly, but something restless, something awake. He told himself this was only a conversation, only coffee, only until dark. Yet as the woman removed her coat and the child's soft footsteps echoed down the hall, he knew the house had already noticed them. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel so empty. He put the kettle on out of habit, not hospitality. The stove answered with a familiar tick and hiss, and the sound settled his nerves. The woman sat at the small kitchen table, folding her hands in her lap, while her daughter perched on the edge of the chair, feet swinging, eyes roaming everywhere at once. The cowboy poured water into chipped mugs and set them down, careful not to meet the woman's gaze for too long. He told himself this was temporary, coffee, a few words, then they would be on their way before night truly fell. "My name's Clara," the woman said after a moment, breaking the quiet like someone stepping onto thin ice. "And this is Lily." She brushed her daughter's hair back with her fingers, a gesture so practiced it carried years of comfort. "We were told there might be work here. Cooking, cleaning. I don't ask for much." He nodded, wrapped both hands around his mug. "I ain't put out any notice," he said. His voice sounded rougher than he meant it to. "But folks talk." He took a sip and winced. "Too hot. Lost my wife last winter. She did all the cooking. Guess I've been managing." Clara's eyes softened, but she didn't offer pity. "I'm sorry," she said simply, and left it at that. No long sighs, no questions. The kind of apology that respected the wound without pressing on it. Lily slid off her chair and wandered toward the stove, drawn by the smell. She stood on her toes to peer at the counter, where a pan of misshapen biscuits sat cooling. "Did you make those?" she asked. He followed her gaze, embarrassed. "Tried to." She considered them with the seriousness of a judge, then smiled. "They're a little brown," she said kindly. "But Mama says brown can still be good." Clara laughed under her breath, surprised and relieved all at once. "Lily," she murmured, but the cowboy shook his head. "It's all right," he said. "She ain't wrong." The woman took a careful sip of coffee. "I've worked kitchens since I was 12, she said. "Hotels, boarding houses, ranches when they'd have me. I bake, I stew, I keep things running. I don't leave a mess." Her words weren't boastful, they were an inventory, a list she carried everywhere. "If there's a chance, even a trial, we'd be grateful." Outside, dusk deepened. The windows caught the fading light, and the house grew still in that way it did when night approached. He glanced at the hallway, at the closed door to the room that had once been his wife's, then back at the empty chair beside him. The ache came, as expected, but it didn't overwhelm him. Instead, it sat quietly, listening. "Could you?" he started, then stopped. He felt foolish, like a boy asking for proof. "Could you show me? Cook something, I mean. If you want." Clara didn't hesitate. She stood, rolled up her sleeves, and washed her hands without being asked. Lily hovered nearby, eyes bright, offering commentary and the occasional spoon. The cowboy leaned against the counter, watching as Clara moved with ease through the kitchen, as if learning its shape in minutes. She found flour, yeast, a bit of honey. The room filled with the soft rhythm of work, measuring, stirring, kneading. Lily hummed while she helped, a tune without words. When the bread went into the oven, the smell changed everything. It crept into the corners, into the places where silence had settled too long. The cowboy closed his eyes and let it wash over him. He saw his wife's hands, remembered laughter, then felt something new layered over the memory, not a replacement but a continuation. They ate in near silence when the loaf came out, steam rising as Clara cut thick slices. The bread was warm, honest, filling. Lily buttered hers carefully and beamed at him. "See," she said. "Told you." He swallowed, throat tight. He watched the empty chair again and waited for guilt. It didn't come. Instead, there was quiet, different from before. Not the hush of loss, but the pause before something begins. Night had fully fallen by the time he stood. "You can stay till morning," he said, surprising himself. "There's a room down the hall. Just for tonight." Clara met his eyes, gratitude shining but measured. "Thank you," she said. And in that moment, with the house breathing and the smell of bread lingering, he felt the promise of something he hadn't dared name. Morning arrived gently, not with the sharp alarm of grief but with the soft sounds of life finding its way back in. The cowboy woke before the sun, as he always did, expecting the familiar weight in his chest. Instead, he heard movement, quiet footsteps, a drawer opening, the low murmur of a woman's voice humming to herself. For a moment, he lay still, unsure if he was dreaming. Then the smell reached him. Coffee. Fresh, strong, and sure of itself. He dressed quickly and stepped into the kitchen. Clara stood at the stove, hair loosely tied back, apron already dusted with flour. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Hope you don't mind," she said. "I couldn't sleep. Figured I'd make myself useful." Lily sat at the table, legs swinging, carefully feeding crumbs to a gray barn cat that had somehow made its way inside. "He followed me," she explained solemnly. "He was lonely." The cowboy raised an eyebrow. "What's his name?" She considered this deeply. "Hope," she said at last, as if the answer had been waiting for her all along. Something eased in him at that word. He poured himself a cup of coffee and took a long sip, feeling the warmth settle where cold had lived too long. Outside, the sky was pale with the promise of sunrise, the fields stretching quiet and patient beyond the windows. They ate together, eggs cooked just right, bread toasted golden. Conversation came easily, unforced. Clara asked about the ranch, about the land, about the rhythms of his days. He answered more than he meant to, finding it easier than expected to speak. Lily asked questions too, about the horses, about the windmill, about whether stars ever got tired of shining. He laughed, a sound that startled him with its own familiarity. When the dishes were cleared, he stood by the window, watching dust rise as the sun crept higher. He turned, cleared his throat. "I said I'd give you a trial week," he began, hands jammed into his pockets. "Fair pay, meals included. There's a small room down the hall. Ain't much, but it's warm." Clara didn't rush her answer. She met his gaze, pride straightening her spine even as relief softened her eyes. "We'd be glad," she said. "We work hard. We won't be trouble." He nodded. "I don't reckon you will be." They moved their few things in before noon. The room smelled of clean sheets and old wood, sunlight slanting across the floor. Lily placed her doll carefully on the bed, then ran back to the kitchen to help Clara, already at home. The barn cat, Hope, claimed a sunny spot by the door and slept, purring like a promise kept. The day passed with small, steady miracles. The house stayed warm. Laughter slipped in where silence once ruled. The cowboy found himself lingering at the table, listening to the hum of work, the soft rhythm of belonging. When Lily tugged at his sleeve and asked if he'd show her the horses, he said yes without thinking. Out by the pasture, the wind carried the scent of grass and earth. Lily walked beside him, her small hand slipping into his, as natural as breath. He felt the weight of it, the trust, the invitation, and did not pull away. Instead, he squeezed gently, and she smiled up at him like the world was safe. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky with fire, he stood on the porch and watched Clara stir a pot, Lily chattering at her side. The house glowed from within, windows lit, alive. He thought of his wife, not with sharp pain, but with gratitude. Love, he realized, did not vanish. It made room. When he stepped inside, Lily looked up and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "You smell like horses," she announced happily. He laughed, resting a hand on her hair. "Guess that means you belong here," he said, surprising them both. Clara met his eyes across the room, something unspoken passing between them, understanding, respect, the quiet beginning of trust. Outside, night settled softly over the ranch. Inside, a family, unexpected, imperfect, and real, began to take shape.